to everyone. First of all, this is Holt. Eran is a good friend of mine. Me and Jean have had several conversations with Eran. Eran has already coached several of our youth pastors in the network, and this presentation is one of those ones when we had a staff meeting, brainstorming, talking about different ideas and topics to bring to our team, as well as record and bring to the network. So this is kind of one of those ideas that came out of here. And Eran, in just a moment, before you do, if you could just share a little bit about yourself and all, but we want to go around the room and kind of let you know who everybody is, who you're talking to. Jean is unable to be here today, had a church emergency. And so, man, over the weekend, he told me he would not make it. So, but he will be able to watch the recording and all those things. So we'll start with Linda and we'll kind of go around the room, introduce ourselves.
Hi, I'm Linda Bottoms. I am the Assistant Director of Church Ministries working with Shawn.
Awesome.
I'm Judy Bass. I'm John Bryant's Executive Admin.
Nice to meet you.
John Bryant, Secretary Treasurer, welcome.
I'm Susan Cassell, and I work in Gene's office as one of his admins.
And I'm Brooke Butler, and I'm the CMD admin, so Shawn and Linda's assistant.
Awesome.
And Shawn Reine, Church Ministries Director. And man, we're excited to have you with us, Eran. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive into this topic today.
Well, my name's Eran. My wife's name is Julie. We are coming up on 26 years of marriage. We got 3 kids, and they're all a little older now. It sounds crazy. Our baby is a senior in high school, and then our middle is a junior in college, and then our oldest is our son. So our son and 2 girls. Our oldest is our son, and he's in ministry and is married. We have a granddaughter, so we hit grandparent status last year, and we actually have I don't know if I told you this, Shawn, but we have grandchild number 2 on the way. Let's go. So that's kind of the family. I'm a dog lover. I can see the dog back over there sleeping on the bed behind me. He's doing his thing. It's my bird dog. But that's a little bit about us. We've been in full-time ministry for 25 years. In the Assemblies of God, always lived here in Pennsylvania our whole lives. I'm from Pittsburgh. My wife is from Philly. We met at University of Valley Forge, one of the AG universities out here. And so been in next gen ministry of some kind, all the way from beginning, all the way through. So we've served as youth evangelists, we've served as youth pastors. We youth pastored at the same church in Reading, Pennsylvania for almost 16 years, raised our kids there primarily. And then in 2020, we relocated back here to Pittsburgh. Go Steelers. It's a rebuild year, but it's kind of like a rebuild year for Denver too, I guess, right? But that's a little bit about us. And 2016, we launched out and we started a ministry called Lead the Generation. All of our information and a lot of the different things that we'll talk about today, you can find on our website, which is just leadthegeneration.com. So leadthegeneration.com. And we initially started out just with a vision to come alongside of youth pastors and to inspire and equip and train. We've been doing this now for going on 6 years. And over the last 6 years, as we've had the opportunity to network with different districts, different networks, different district youth directors, different church ministry directors, we've become more and more aware of some of the growing challenges that a lot of our churches have, a lot of our Assembly of God churches have, especially your average size Assembly of God church. You know, when you think average size AG church, roughly about 120 people in a church. And so that typically means that a lot of their next gen ministries, their next gen youth ministries or their kids ministries are run by volunteers, right? And so the need for training resources that are accessible and applicable and relevant to that kind of leader, we discovered were far more rare than what we had realized. I had the honor of doing youth ministry in a larger setting. And so I just tended to think that that's how every church was. Every church had a full-time kids pastor. Every church had a full-time youth pastor. So I was shocked when we started to travel and build relationships with people across the nation, especially in the Assemblies of God, to realize that about 50% currently, right now, about 50% of AG churches across the country have no weekly youth ministry at all. So no youth ministry. And then when we started to dive into the churches that do have youth ministry and kids ministry as well, we learned that about 30% or so of AG churches that have weekly youth ministry and kids ministry are providing that through a volunteer leader in their church. So right now in our country, in our denomination, our fellowship, Assemblies of God, roughly speaking, about 15 to 20% of our churches are doing next gen ministry with a full-time vocational member on their team, a staff member. And so what you're dealing with then is you're dealing with a bunch of churches that don't have next gen ministry at all, right? Roughly half. And then you're dealing with another maybe 30% that are endeavoring to do it, but they're doing it with a volunteer, which typically means they're doing it with somebody that hasn't necessarily been trained, right? They haven't necessarily had even the opportunities or the resources provided to them. I think one of the last stats I looked at was that for every student in our country, for every student in our country, there's only one full-time vocational youth worker for every 428 students across the nation. Right. So we are dealing with the challenge in the Assemblies of God and other denominations as well. We're dealing with the challenge of how do we move next gen ministry forward when a lot of our churches don't have the budgetary means to go out and hire, right? And even if we said, man, we could snap our fingers and we could provide the budgetary resources, the other challenge we're dealing with is a lack of candidates for full-time youth pastors and for full-time kids pastors. And I see Shawn nodding his head, and it's the same nod I get from every single church ministries director and DYD across the country when we have this conversation. And that is, I've got more openings than what I have candidates, right? And so I think in the Assemblies of God, we're doing some things with the Called initiative that are going to reap some tremendous fruit down the road, but that's probably 5 to 7 years down the road before we're going to start to see that fruit. And we have churches now that are saying, how do I reach teenagers now? How do I reach children now? And so we just, as a ministry, set our hearts towards God. If you want us to help meet that need, show us what to do, show us, who to partner with, how we can do that. We started a coaching program, a 1-year experience about 5 years ago that we felt would address a part of this need of just providing the resourcing and training that leaders need. And then what we've come to realize over the last about a year and a half is that we needed to develop some resources that would specifically come alongside of our smaller Assembly of God churches that can only move ministry forward in the next gen world with well-trained volunteer pastors, so to speak, volunteer leaders, volunteer kids pastors, volunteers, youth pastors. So a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, we partnered with Jared Berry, who is the district youth director for the New York Ministry Network, and started to develop resources in partnership with him that would come alongside of our small churches, specifically in this case to help them launch a youth ministry where there was no youth ministry. So think like church planning, right? This is kind of like youth ministry planning, right? So we developed that, all the content for that about a year and a half ago. And then we privately piloted this program with the New York network this year. And so the beginning of this year, we started working with 5 churches in the state of New York, all of which were without youth ministry. And we started working them through this coaching and leadership development resource that we've entitled Launch, just because we're going to help launch a youth ministry. So we started working with them beginning of this year, five churches. 4 of those churches have continued on with us. One of them had to take a break because of a pastoral transition. But of those 4 churches, all 4 of them now at this point have launched a youth ministry in their church. So in essence, we've helped plant 4 youth ministries in small churches. From those 4 youth ministries this past summer, 22 students from those 4 youth ministries went to youth camp for the first time that they had ever gone to district youth camp. Coming back from youth camp, 7 of those kids got water baptized in their home churches the Sunday after youth camp, right? And one of those youth ministries launched after youth camp. They launched just in September, their youth ministry, and on their launch night, their opening night, they had close to 24 students that showed up on that first night. And so we're excited with the results that we're seeing, and excited to be able to offer this now as a resource across the nation to other networks that would say, and other churches that would say, this is what we need. We're a church that we don't have the budget to go out and hire a youth pastor or kids pastor. We're a church that desperately wants to reach the next generation. But we know that we're going to need to do that with volunteer leadership and with volunteer pastors. But we feel kind of stuck with, like, how do we do that? What does that look like? So here's what we built, just a brief summary. We built a 1-year training experience for a volunteer to be trained to be the volunteer youth pastor in their church. Right now, we only have this for youth ministry. We are rapidly trying to develop and deploy this for kids pastors as well. But right now for youth pastors, it's a 1-year experience. It's built on 3 leadership values that we have in our organization when it comes to leadership growth. So what do you need for leadership growth? Value number 1, you need community, right? Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, one man is to another. And so we want to take a group of leaders and put them in community with one another into a cohort, right? And they can build with one another, encourage one another, learn together, sharpen one another. So we've taken, for instance, in New York, we've taken these 4 churches now, which is about 8 to 10 leaders, all in, and we put them in a monthly cohort, so that they can work together and they can build relationships together, encourage one another. Our second value is they need content, and so we've developed on-demand video content. We give them access to the on-demand system so they can have a year's worth of video content, and all of that content is focused towards building them up and training them as a volunteer youth pastor. So that content is briefly, I guess an overview for the content would look like 3 main buckets of content. Bucket number 1, gospel fluency. So we want to make sure that these volunteer leaders have a thorough understanding of the gospel, right? Because that's going to be the primary thing that they're going to be passing on to the next generation. So we spend time training them in theology and gospel fluency, right? Bucket number 2, what is biblical discipleship? So we want to help them understand, what does it mean to actually produce another disciple? What does that look like, biblically speaking? What are the marks of that? What are the identifiers of that? Bucket number 3, how do I do it? Just pragmatic, practical, hands-on youth ministry. And so we're answering questions like, how do I do a youth service? How do I partner with my lead pastor? How do I partner with the parents of the students in my ministry? How do I build my leadership team? How do I run effective small groups? We're not necessarily doing training on things like how to have a great youth worship team or how to preach a great sermon, because most of these groups will be smaller groups. And so they really are a small group. So the primary focus of the training is gospel fluency and discipleship, and then some youth ministry pragmatics. And so all of that would be the on-demand content, which is our second value. Our third value is you need a coach, right? You need somebody who can inspire you, who can push you, who can hold you accountable when need be, but someone who's a couple steps ahead of you and can really pour into your life. And so with launch training, we provide 2 different kinds of coaching. So we provide a cohort coach. And so that's a coach that coaches the whole cohort of leaders on a monthly Zoom call. So every month, the cohort's together on a Zoom call. They have come onto the call having already watched a couple of the training videos. And so that was kind of like their homework, so to speak. And then the cohort coaches joins with them and coach them through that content and help them apply that to their life, apply that to, their ministry context. And so that's where lead to generation comes in, where I sit and provide that coaching as a part of the experience, and where I'm there with them on the call and I'm coaching through the content. So that's the cohort coach. But then we also want to see them have a one-on-one coach. And so that's where we ask the network to say, you provide the one-on-one coaching, right? And so that would be for Rocky Mountain Network, that would be Shawn and his team of next gen leaders, and who would volunteer to say, hey, I want to be a one-on-one coach and I want to help pour into, one of these volunteers that we're training, or maybe two of them. And the reason for that is, the cohort coaching is really good for applying kind of broader principles to a ministry context. The one-on-one coaching helps a person take it and apply it to their specific setting, to their life. And I think most importantly, what the one-on-one coaching does is the one-on-one coaching gives us a relational foundation for that brand new youth ministry, that brand new volunteer youth pastor, to be relationally connected with the ministry of the network for long-term, right? And so what we want to see in every single group that is launched is what we saw in New York. We want to see them eventually being a part of Speed to Light, being a part of camp, being a part of youth convention, being a part of those experiences with other students, other youth pastors, with the team from the network. That way, when the 1 year coaching experience ends, they still have a long runway of resourcing and support that comes from the network office, right? And so Lead the Generation comes in to help serve as a catalyst, as a resource center, and as a part of the 1 year experience to get everyone launched. The network serves as the long-term lifeline for the health of Next Gen Ministries and for youth ministries. So that's a brief overview of what we're doing. Some stories of what the results of it have been so far. Our long-term dream and vision is that we would one day be able to help be involved in planting and starting 100 youth ministries a year, maybe across our nation, in order to meet the need. When I look at the landscape of Next Gen Ministry, in my mind, for the foreseeable future, it's going to be powered by volunteer pastors, and it's going to be powered by small churches. I'll finish with this thought right here. Interesting study that comes from a book by Mark DeVries called Family-Based Youth Ministry. But in that study, they said this. They said that the youth ministry of a large church or the youth ministry of a small church ultimately had less effect on the long-term success and growth of a student, had less of an effect than what the relationship between a student and a godly adult had with one to another. And so when we think about youth ministry, we're thinking about how can we create opportunities for godly adults to build relationships with students for the sake of spiritual maturity and for discipleship. That's what we're creating. Those are the type of youth ministries that we're helping launch in the state of New York, next year in Rocky Mountain, and wherever else we're able to partner and go. So I hope that's been helpful for you. I hope that's been encouraging. I hope that inspires you to believe that even our smaller churches can make a huge impact on the next generation. 5 kids, 10 kids, 15 kids, doesn't matter. You're making a difference. You're discipling the next generation of students and leaders.
That's awesome. Eran, I got a couple questions. So, we're going to be sending this recording out to pastors. And so the pastor who's listening to this right now saying, man, I only have maybe 2 students, 3 students. I don't know the volunteer leader just yet. What would you encourage them to do right now? Like, what would be that next step for them? Because I know they hear this, they want to do this. What would be the next step for them in this process?
Well, I would say, one, if you have 2 or 3 students, those 2 or 3 students all know probably 10 students each, and so you have the nucleus or the catalyst just with those 2 or 3 students to launch something, right? Doesn't have to be big. You could launch with 5 kids, you could launch with 10 kids, and you can be making a difference in every one of their individual lives. in regards to the second part of your question with having a volunteer leader, you do need a volunteer leader in place without a doubt. We can't create those for you. You as a lead pastor need to have somebody, in your congregation, in your setting, that you believe like, hey, this person could do it with the right training, with the right coaching. They have the commitment and they have the calling to want to come alongside the next gen leader. If you don't have that person, I would encourage lead pastor to say, hey, don't be afraid to cast vision for that. Don't be afraid to preach to that end. Don't be afraid to pray to that end within your own church. I don't think you need somebody who comes to you with a 4-year degree in youth ministry, right? I don't think you need somebody that comes to you with previous experience. I think you need somebody who loves students. I think you need somebody who's committed. And I think you need somebody who's mature in their faith, right? They don't even have to be young. They can be old and bald like me, and they can still be really effective, right? Or they can be young and bald like Shawn and still be really effective, right? But I would tell you as a lead pastor, look for an adult who's a godly adult who has maturity in their faith. Look for someone who loves students, and look for someone who's willing to be faithful and committed, right? Students see too many adults walk out on them after just a couple months. And so they tend not to trust adults because of that. So find an adult who's going to be faithful with you. And then we can partner and we can train them and we can resource them. We can equip them.
So for us in Rocky Mountain, our goal is to launch this in January. And so we're looking for churches now. So if you're listening to this recording, we'd love to have you reach out to our offices, and I'd love to have a conversation with you. Right now, we've got about 5 churches that are interested. I think that we're going to try to maybe cap that at no more than 10, but that's a pretty bold goal for the first year. But I'm excited to see what's going to happen with youth ministries. You mentioned a little bit about kids ministry as well. I know that that's something that's coming in the future. So there's all kind of ways to receive coaching and training. And if you're a pastor listening to this, we invite you to reach out to us and let us know how. Eran, how much would this coaching for you for lead generation? What is the cost on a year of coaching?
Yeah, it's just a one-time payment of $399 for the year, $399, and so that covers the whole year of coaching, all the content. It gives them all the on-demand content. And it gives them lifetime access to the on-demand content as well. So they can always go back and re-access it and watch it again. So trying to make that as affordable as possible for churches of all sizes. And that's per church, not per person. So if you had multiple people from the church, that price stays the same. It's a per church.
It's incredible. Well, Eran, thanks so much for being with us today, man. We appreciate your heart.